technology is not absolute. You do have to apply judgment that's there. And that's why I bring back that I'm a big believer in the role of humans there, but their role is going to have to shift over time. And people that really focus on investing in themselves will be part of that reinvestment.
Yo, it's the future, don't hit the snooze. AI is here giving humans the boost. Team Humans rolling, brains in the game with Dan Turchin. Y'all remember the name. People ain't in the mix, no stopping the flow. Better work, better life, yeah, we're ready to go. Robots and humans, a collab, you know. Okay, let's start the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 386. I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're the AI platform that automates IT and HR employee service. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You get some fun facts and some tips and comments that don't always make it into the full weekly episode. There'll be a link in the show notes. We're all in this together. If you like what we do, if you feel inspired by any one of the great conversations on the podcast, you owe it to humanity to share a link to this episode or any other that you enjoy with just one friend. You know what? It's good karma. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode like this one from the mailbag from Davis in Croydon, England. Nice town. I used to live not far from there. Davis's favorite episode is number 312 with the great Ray Wang, tech pundit from networks like CNBC and Fox Business, and CEO of Constellation Research, about decentralized intelligence, data precision, and AI's evolution. We'll, of course, link to that one in the show notes. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly, and the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Here it is for today. Bo Likegaard from IDC answered the question, is SaaS dead in 2026? This way, Bo says enterprise compute is dominated by big SaaS companies, but those tools remain a patchwork of interfaces and data silos, forcing users to adapt to the software rather than the other way around. Each SaaS app demands its own learning curve and user interface, often used sporadically and inefficiently. In this environment, AI offers a compelling alternative. Instead of navigating multiple dashboards, users could interact with agent-driven conversational interfaces that perform tasks across systems. Imagine instructing an AI agent to approve last week's expense reports or generate next quarter's sales forecast, and having the agent orchestrate workflows across HR, finance, and CRM systems. This agentic flow of work user experience could replace much of today's direct interactions. The traditional pay-per-user per month licensing model becomes increasingly obsolete as digital labor replaces manual interaction. IDC predicts that by 2028, pure seat-based pricing will be obsolete, with 70% of software vendors refactoring pricing strategies around value-based metrics. It's a pretty straightforward read. I will, of course, link to the full article in the show notes. My commentary: enterprise software interfaces are obviously changing to accommodate language-driven navigation, but the now cliched trope about the death of SaaS is both inaccurate and, I'll go so far as saying, irresponsible. Software from vendors like Microsoft, SAP, Salesforce, and ServiceNow is sticky. That is, it's extremely complex and expensive to replace. Customers expect those vendors to modernize their interfaces with AI-first features, and they expect value-based instead of seat-based pricing. But SaaS as a delivery model for AI-driven workflows is not going anywhere. Terminology matters, and intellectual integrity matters. IDC and other orgs should spend more time sharing data and case studies that reflect how the world of work is actually changing. Users are apprehensive about how to integrate AI into their work processes, and they're looking for leadership from management teams as well as vendors to make work life better because of AI, not in spite of AI. Of course, we'll continue having this important conversation in the weeks and months ahead. Now, shifting to this week's conversation. Tom Scott is the CEO of Wrike, the work management platform used by over 20,000 customers like Walmart Canada and Sony Pictures Television across more than 140 countries and used by nearly 2 million end users. Tom transitioned from the CFO role in July of 2023. He was previously CFO at Zebra Technologies, Fetch Robotics, and prior to that in finance leadership at Corning. Tom holds a BA and MBA from the University of Virginia. Go Cavaliers. And without further ado, Tom, it's my pleasure to welcome you to AI in the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about that background and how you ended up in the CEO seat at Wrike.
Sure, Dan. Thanks for having me on today. And the intro on Wrike and myself. Just a little bit of background on me. So I've now been with Wrike for coming up on 4 years for the business. And as you mentioned, I started out 4 years ago working for the founder as CFO, and have seen a pretty wide number of transformations here at Wrike over that 4 year time period. Taking over as CEO about 2.5 years ago. Kind of previously, I've worked all across technology. I've worked in everything from building out cell towers early in my career to working in telecom services, communications infrastructure, robotics, and now SaaS and all the innovation work that we're doing across AI today.
Tom, shockingly, some listeners have not heard of Wrike. So for their edification, maybe just share a customer story that makes you most proud to give us a sense of what Wrike does.
Absolutely. I'll give you a little bit of background on this as well. One of the best parts about my job over the last 2.5 years has been the increased time that I get to spend with our customers and hear these stories. And one of the things that we do as an organization is in the fourth quarter, we have our user event, which is Collaborate. And for the last 2 years, we've hosted a number of in-person events that followed this virtual event that we do for the user conference. And so this year, that ended up being multiple events in the US. It ended up being a London event, ended up being a Tokyo event. And over this really intense, roughly 1 month time period, I got to hear a enormous number of just like impactful customer stories during that time periods where I'm not selling them, they're not selling me. I'm just hearing like, what are you doing with our product to deliver value for your organization? And 3 of these really just hit home in terms of A, that's impactful, but B, that's just really cool and I love talking about it. One of them was we had a pharmaceutical executive stand up at our Tokyo event and specifically talk about using Wrike's work management capabilities to increase launch velocity, so product launch velocity in terms of getting their cancer drugs to market. And he was talking about being able to bring multiple teams together, everything from R&D, legal, compliance, product, marketing, to be able to remove friction from that process. And he just spoke so clearly about this is the impact statement of being able to shorten that time to market. Wrike does a lot of work with marketing agencies or marketing teams. And we've got a really interesting case study that we've got on our website talking about Jellyfish, which is a marketing agency, being able to free up more time for creativity and global alignment as they're working with their clients. And I really like that because they're talking about not just how do they remove friction and velocity, but also how do you adopt new features that Wrike is developing and essentially reimagine how work should be done. Third one actually cuts across a number of customer stories, so it's going to end up being like a blended story. But we do a whole lot of work with manufacturing organizations, and in particular where they sit at that intersection point between hardware and software. And this is really interesting to me because you often have these 2 different work methodologies that come together at that point. You've got the waterfall approach that is very predominant in hardware delivery, slamming up against agile within a software world. And we come across a large number of use cases, whether it is auto manufacturing, whether it is consumer products, whether it is pharma, whether it is like racing teams that are using Wrike to bring those 2 sort of differing styles together to improve transparency, improve velocity. And I love that because I spent a lot of my time earlier in my career in hardware, software businesses, both robotics as well as what I did at Corning, which was manufacturing communications infrastructure. I was very familiar with the tension points you get where you're bringing together a SKU-based world with the virtual world of software delivery. So three examples, but the theme that runs through all of them that I love is you go to these events, you're talking to customers, you can just feel the passion come through, and they almost always end with someone saying to me, "I'd love to show you what I built." And they pull up their device and they start walking you through it, and you can just see the pride in what they built and the satisfaction of being able to deliver that impact for their teams. And that to me is like a big part of what keeps me fired up to do what I do.
You joined at an interesting and exciting time, both in terms of where Wrike was at and where it's gone, but also in terms of enterprise software. Maybe unpack both of those. What was the hardest part about transitioning from kind of finance leadership to being the CEO?
I've been doing technology roles across finance and operations for over 20 years now. And I never thought of myself as a finance leader. I always thought of myself as a company leader who had responsibility for a financial function. And because of that mindset, I was always delving into other areas of the business. The business that I had sold into Corning, which is how I got there, I'd had responsibility for post-sales support inside that organization in addition to finance. And so that meant that you're very close to that friction point of you've delivered a product, it's out in the real world, and the customer is experiencing it and providing feedback into that. And I really drew on all of these things when I came into Wrike, because you had a founder business where the CEO had run it from the beginning till the moment that I got here. And to have any credibility as an executive walking into Wrike at that point in time, you had to be all in. And that meant that you had to establish as broad a context as possible and credibility with this team. Otherwise, you are not going to cut through what the founder had been able to build up at that time. And so that was my day one mindset when I walked in the door. And so when I ended up transitioning into the CEO role, I viewed that less as a step function at that time and more as a progression of what I'd already been building over the prior almost 18 months to get to that point. And that made it a lot easier. I'd say probably the biggest challenge for me at that point was moving center stage. I had spent my entire career up to that point largely advising founders in that number two role. And I was super comfortable working with that model where I knew how to develop a relationship and credibility and deliver that impact. And now I had to cultivate that person to help me. And that was a flip of working with it. I'd say the second thing was diving deeper into the product, the sort of the creation and building of the product, because I felt that we had a very strong product and value proposition. And early in transitioning into this role, I was less inclined to weigh in heavily on that. But 6 months in, you have to have a perspective of where is the value with the customer. And that's where I really started investing a lot of my time, I'd say about 6 months into the transition.
Before we started the recording, we were talking about the history of Wrike, and you referred to Andrew, who's famously the founder of Wrike from back in 2006 as a force of nature. We talked to a lot of amazing inspirational founders. We've got a big community of entrepreneurs listening. Maybe just talk about who is Andrew and kind of how did his vision kind of shape where the company is today?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Andrew Filo is the founder of Wrike. He had a software development business, pre Wrike, and came across the need to be able to coordinate work on a global cross-functional basis. And essentially came to the conclusion that the available tools that were out there were incredibly substandard. And that led to the creation of Wrike, initially as a project management application to be able to serve that use case. Over time, where we really invested as an organization was, how do you create the scalability and the configurability of this application to not just do task and project work, but to be able to support recurring workflows for really demanding enterprise customers. And so if you look, Wrike serves everything from very small teams up to Fortune 5 companies today, but we're skewed on the larger side of organizations. And I believe that is because of that investment thesis going back over a decade at this point, to really invest in that scalability and the ability to manage complex work for our customers. The other area that we invested heavily in was going very deep into specific use cases. So yes, we can serve very horizontal use cases, but we chose to go very deep for our customers into marketing, for example. So campaign production. We do a lot of work with client service delivery, where you're tracking hours, you're tracking skills. You can actually run your services business out of it. We do a lot of work on product launch, as I was indicating on the pharmaceutical example that I was talking about. And then a lot of PMOs, so transformation initiatives inside a business. So that can cut across a pretty wide swath there.
So the other complicated piece about when you joined is that, as I alluded to in the fun fact, enterprise software has been completely upended in the last 4 years. Like the notion of bringing a product to market that's like a something tracker, a database and some forms on top of it is obviously more than antiquated. How has that been for you, shifting to an AI first world, building on top of a 18 to 15 to 20-year-old legacy enterprise software company?
So I'd break it into a couple of observations on my end, both internally what I see here, as well as what we hear from our customers. And I'd say the two big terms that I hear a lot are pace and noise. That over the last few years, the pace has increased to an astounding level on a daily basis. Just the amount of change that you're trying to internalize, both real and discussed. And the other thing is the noise, because it is true that everybody is talking about AI in this world. Like there is not an executive board in the world that is not talking about it. And this puts pressure on people, processes, and systems to navigate that, because there's this expectation that change is immediate. Now, change is not immediate. Even in this era that we're in today, and there's a reason for it, is because transformation remains extremely hard. And transformation remains extremely hard because it is often about so much more than the technology. I actually think that we are more relevant in the era that we are in today, because we are often used as a system of record for work. And when you think about some of the challenges of how do you deliver true efficiency gains in this world that we're in today, it requires a fair amount of context and depth. And what Wrike captures is this context and depth. It's like the human input into what are we actually trying to do here and trying to accomplish. And I believe that by utilizing Wrike in this way, we unlock these capabilities in this AI era. And our job as innovators, as it relates to the specific AI experience, is how do we make AI integral to the experience of getting value of Wrike? And whether that is utilizing our agent builder, which we launched last year, to be able to spin up agents within your instance of Wrike to automate your work, whether it is horizontal or specifically applied within those vertical use cases, or utilizing our MCP connection to be able to integrate multiple tools across your tool stack. It has to be integral, because I'm a firm believer that SaaS has a role to play in the world that's in front of us. But it's because of that deep connective tissue of how we interact with our customers. And we have to be reimagining what is that interface in terms of which we're going to be delivering value to that customer set.
Today's episode is brought to you by my company, PeopleRain. As you hopefully know, PeopleRain is the AI platform that automates work. Tens of millions of employees around the world get back 4 to 6 hours per week because PeopleRain automates away the friction. Imagine a world where your teams never have to wait for technology upgrades or to have a human reset their password or get added to a distribution list or get help with payroll, PTO, or benefits. Inbox zero for the help desk, zero friction for employees. That's the future of work. That's PeopleRain. We're offering all members of Team Human, and hey, that's you, our listeners, an exclusive discount on PeopleRain just for being part of this amazing community. Get the discount code at peoplerain.io/podcast. That's PeopleRain, like the reign of a king or queen.io/podcast. Now back to this week's conversation. As vendors, it's easy to fall into the trap of AI as a hammer, and all of a sudden, everything looks like a nail. One of the things that we have to be sensitive to is that every new AI capability that we introduce also introduces unintended consequences, because AI is non-deterministic by its nature. How do you, as the leader of a company that impacts a lot of really important work around the world, weigh not what can we do with AI, but what should we do?
This kind of gets into the question around what is responsible use of a technology. And I'll start by saying that I'm obviously a huge believer in the technology, but I'm a bigger believer in the role that humans have to play in this. And I hope that I am consistent internally and externally in how I talk about it, because it's a firmly held belief. And the way that I have tried to explain this to our audience is that I think about value in terms of this concept of organizational intelligence, of how do you create value that is up and to the right on a sustainable basis for the overall organization. And that, to me, comes from two specific components. It comes from the human intelligence aspect of it, and it comes from the AI aspect of it. And if you look at specific use cases that we do inside Wrike, so Wrike as a company as opposed to Wrike as a vendor, what we've done is we've tried to be our own best customer. And within our marketing team in particular, we have gone really deep trying to test the boundaries of what you can do with the technology. So, for example, how do you bring together performance marketing data that you capture from your various channels? How do you marry that up with your marketing workflows and OKR goals that we track inside Wrike? And how do you create savings on that basis from a reporting standpoint, assigning follow-ups? And what we find is you can absolutely create almost immediate ROI with that deep use case, but it requires a human in the loop because, as you pointed out, it is non-deterministic. You can apply the same data into an LLM and you might get a different answer on day one versus day two. So you have to really understand what are you plugging in exactly, exactly how are you prompting it so you've got the guardrails around it. The model that we have found inside Wrike that works well is we've created subject matter experts that work with our functions. And they tend to be deep within a function. So within the example I was talking about marketing, they tend to be enthusiast, meaning they really like working with the both Wrike and AI technologies to really understand some of that. And we have them be evangelists across the rest of the company to explain, here's what works, here's what you have to really watch out for, and here are ways to build guardrails within the process. So it really is driving that enablement and understanding that's there. And when I take this message and I talk to our customers, I strongly advocate having that type of person that is well-versed, that can be that source of enablement and is obviously questioning what they're seeing, because the technology is not absolute. You do have to apply judgment that's there. And that's why I bring that back into that first point, is that I'm a big believer in the role of humans there, but their role is going to have to shift over time.
So let's apply that to Wrike as a company. Again, not as a technology vendor. When Tom and Dan are back here, let's say in 2 years, having a version of this conversation, what has the impact of AI been on your hiring plan?
It is absolutely a fact that the technology transition we are seeing right now is going to have an impact on some roles. I don't want to profess otherwise. You've got people that fall on either side of this, of no, it's not going to have any impact, or the doomsday predictions that are out there. I am not a doomsday predictor. I believe this is very similar to lots of other technology transitions that we have been through. And I also think that one of the bigger risks to someone's job today is whether or not they are embracing the technology that's in front of them and looking for ways to move up the value stack of the job that they are doing today. And that makes this very similar to other transitions we were talking about. You and I started this conversation. I was talking about building cell towers when I was in my 20s. And so I've seen multiple waves of technology transitions that's happened even over the course of my career, that's forced me to reinvent myself. And that is the mantra that I'm constantly talking about inside Wrike, the company, which is, if you think your job is going to look the same 2 years from now, it won't. And so if you are not in the business of constantly reinventing yourself and understanding like how you create value, for the customer, for the company, for yourself, then yes, you absolutely are at risk. Because what's going to happen is there's going to be a period of profit capture, and then there will be a period of reinvestment that has to happen. And people that really focus on investing in themselves will be part of that reinvestment, and that's the message that I want to be propagating with inside Wrike.
So if you're a kid in, let's say, your undergrad right now, and you're thinking about the future, gosh, it's a pretty intimidating time, because like the prevailing narrative paints a pretty dark picture, right? And yet, I think certainly those of us in tech, or in the leadership seat, have I think we're a little bit more confident. We have more conviction that the jobs that those undergrads are going to be desperately needed for don't exist yet. And just as a species, it's hard to kind of get excited about a future that hasn't yet come to fruition. But it's probably analogous to 20 to 25 years ago, as the web was just taking shape, a lot of jobs are really hard to anticipate that are now, very, very, commonplace in the world of work. What's your message? If let's say you're talking to, a class of kids in an undergrad today, and, trying to help them understand that, there will be jobs for them, but they might not look like jobs that exist today.
I think it's hard to have a deterministic education and job plan in the world that we're in today, meaning that you go in and think that you can invest in a particular skill that is going to guarantee you a particular job or salary on the other side. And the example I often give people is, I never could have planned the career that I have had. If you go back and you look at all the various choices, options I had, choices I made, you could maybe put together a talk track that explains it. But I'm really quick to tell people that most of these things were accidents, and that the biggest thing that I did for myself over the course of my career was I was broadly curious, and I chased experiences. And then I contextualized those experiences into, repetition for success and applied to different environments. And so what I try and tell people is that the more experience that you can gather, where you can quickly learn, adapt, and apply that in a new scenario, that is essentially what you have to do. And look, that feels scary, because you're like, well, what am I applying it to? And I'm like, I can't tell you that. But that is really the reality of most people that have seen, big success in their life. They never could have predicted it. They chased, passion and experience, and then when the moment struck, they took advantage of it. And what's happening now is we're just opening that up to a broader population of people. And we have to evangelize the value of that broad-based education to be able to reach it. But it is not deterministic.
So you mentioned curiosity, which is just such a wonderful human trait that separates us from machines. When you're coaching your leadership team about the kind of traits, given this kind of these non-deterministic career paths, what are you coaching them to try to select for in the hiring process?
I heavily push people to select hiring based on intensity and the desire to learn. When I go back to 4 years ago when I got here, I was rebuilding a lot of teams, because those teams had been collapsed into the Citrix at that point in time, so they no longer existed. And I was personally recruiting person by person at that point to bring them into Wrike. And what I was looking for was a certain just personality. It was more than a grinder. It was someone that had tenacity, the ability to see things through, and a sense of ownership. And one of the first people I brought in was an accounting manager. And when I brought her on afterwards, she called me up and she was like, "Why did you pick me?" I was like, "Oh, it was really easy. As I talked to the last 3 people that you'd worked for over the last decade plus, and they all talked about your extreme sense of ownership, and that told me that you were committed." Because we had people that a decade later were still talking about that sense of you, and she's still here and is a core part of the team. And so I often use that example with my leadership team of like, pick that over domain, over specific education, over specific experience, because that is the intangible. And if you bring someone in with high intelligence, that extreme sense of ownership, they will make an impact, because they won't settle just for mediocrity. They will find a way to win. And when you're a company like Wrike, I can't afford to go hire like the top name on every position I have. I have to be able to attract people that are willing to go make a name for themselves inside this environment.
Well, gosh, there you have it. Anyone listening who wants to get a job at Wrike, you just got some great coaching from the CEO. That's an unfair advantage. Tom, we're about out of time. I got to get you off the hot seat, but not without answering one last important question for me. You've been at the nexus of just some really fascinating, like, important technologies, between the robotics space through Zebra, most recently, then Wrike Enterprise Software, AI first enterprise software. What is Tom's perspective on something that we'll say is just commonplace at work? Let's say in 5 years, it's 2031, and but now it just seems like science fiction. What's that one thing at work that you think will change?
I'm always so reticent to answer this question. Yeah, and I think a little bit about this in the long view, because I think about the fact that my grandfather lived into his 90s, but when he was born in the 20s, there was no electricity, and yet he lived long enough to see me working for an autonomous robotics company over the course of that 90 plus years. And so when I think about that 5 years, there is so much that I believe is going to happen there. I think it is table stakes that we are going to see, agentic activity within the workplace that is coordinating activity across the tech stack. So as you think about the friction points that, going from different applications or different teams, I already see the building blocks to ingest briefs, to create plans, assign out actions, do in-process retrospectives in terms of what's going wrong, and then issue course corrections on that basis, all without humans kind of interacting on that basis. And I believe that will be extremely commonplace, well before the 5-year mark at this point.
Good vision. We'll have to have you back on, and we'll see how you did at prognosticating.
Dan, thank you so much.
Yeah, Tom, great work. Where can the audience learn more about you and the great work that Wrike's doing?
You can follow the activity. We maintain a blog on our website, so Wrike.com. You should follow me on LinkedIn. Follow Wrike on LinkedIn, because we are fairly active in terms of posting updates there as well.
Brilliant. Well, there you have it, the great Tom Scott from Wrike. And gosh, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.
Yo, it's the end of the show, time to power it down. AI's the sis, but humans wear the crown. Team Human in the house, got the vibe so clever. Dan Turchin from PeopleRain, making us better. We learned about AI for humans. We're ready to conquer the future, that's all for now. See you next time.